The Sentinel is known to be reliable, fearless, disciplined, consistent, courageous, motivated, and skillful.
So do what you feel passionate about. Take chances.
All these qualities start from the mind. Your mind can be your worst enemy or your most powerful weapon.
The world becomes your library to help you become better at your craft.
Is this the dagger?
Learn how to achieve greatness and tap into the Sentinel mindset.
This episode is brought to you by The Arena. The Arena focuses on helping law enforcement and security professionals achieve their ultimate work experience, curriculum, and fitness goals. Visit thearenatoronto.com.
Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this wonderful, amazing day today. I have here today two very special guests, and I'm very excited on the topic that we're going to be discussing. Well, first, we have Dr. Judith Anderson. Now, who is Dr. Judith Anderson? Well, have you guys heard of the iPREP program? It's taught by using scenario-based training and basic sport-related technology, and that's the heart rate variability biofeedback monitoring, to rewire a person's immediate response to stress to be adaptive in the moment. And this training is focused on how people can learn to modify their responses to stress in the moment and over the long term, and integrate into whatsoever occupation you're working in. Mm-hmm. And also we have here Steve Poplawski. I was actually going to say Dr. Stephen Poplawski. Now, who's Stephen? He has a program called Step Training Inc. And we've actually had him on the show before, and he had an incredible wealth of information. And it's an internationally recognized professional training network that provides evidence-based research programs that address the modern, relevant, and practical needs of professionals looking to update or increase their skill sets. And I do know, Steve, that you've done quite a bit of work with municipalities and governments on the whole 9 yards. So both of you, welcome today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
How are you guys doing?
Great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic.
Amazing. So what I wanted to do is, because I'm going to tell you guys have two big players here in the room today. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get an opportunity, of course, for the world to hear you and, maybe kind of almost get to the point of what inspired you to do what you do. So I do know just from conversation that the iPREP program is a program that is incorporated into what you do in your training.
Yeah,
in the sense of like you use a lot of the...
Yes, we use some of the practices. We do some of the training, the train-the-trainer training.
That's right. That's right. So what I want to do is I want to highlight this program. So Dr. Judith, why don't you tell us what inspired you to kind of, first of all, get into the field before you started to create this?
Yeah, well, my early training in psychology and health psychology, I did internships at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and I worked with soldiers and vets on occupational stress injuries and then health over the long term. And so what I saw was that there was a lot of problems over the long term. And so when I finished with my training, I came back to Canada as a professor at the University of Toronto, and I decided to look into intervention work. Like, what could we do to help people, health and performance improve before they get sick, like before it gets all the way to like a clinical condition. And so that's when I really started working with law enforcement officers to develop intervention programs based on evidence, like research. What were the actual problems that we were seeing, and then where could we improve? Yeah.
Okay. Now, I did read quite a bit of literature and documents that were provided. One of the things that stuck out was something around the evidence-based police training. It's just a quote, and it's: "The problem is not that police officers aren't following their training. They are. The problem is that their training in itself." Okay.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about that? I mean, and just share, like, I guess the struggles that many people in law enforcement and even the security sector would have around this specific mindset.
Yeah, that was actually a great quote from Ombudsman Dubé when he did a report on police training back in 2016, asking the government for some focus on new types of training, evidence-based training. And when I started working with police officers, I was surprised, like coming from research and coming from a training and education background, I was surprised that there wasn't more training for police officers, particularly for the internal components. There was a lot of great training on weapons and tactics and the techniques and so forth that they needed, but not a lot of training about how to address your own stress response, which we're all humans, so we have them. And police are going into really intense situations and really, working with people that are highly escalated. So what about the techniques for them, for their own, health and performance? So that's what I focused on, and developing programs for that specifically, because I saw that as a gap in police training.
Interesting. A lot of people that struggle, for example, with dealing with situations, we've heard of people suffering through PTSD,
Yes.
for example. Would stuff like practices or training sessions like this almost like kind of minimize or limit or reduce people going through those kind of experiences?
Yeah, so what we've seen in research is that when people are highly stressed and they're, over the long term, or they go through either one acute situation that's extremely stressful or overwhelming, then PTSD can develop, but it also can be from long-term kind of overwhelming stress and chronic stress, and then you get into a situation and potentially mistakes are made, or it's overwhelming stress or so forth, and then you can develop PTSD. So we want techniques that can be taught from the beginning of training in order to prevent a person from getting so escalated internally.
Yes.
Where that happens. You can't always avoid it. Obviously, there's overwhelming situations sometimes, and that can happen, so PTSD can happen. But we find that this can help prevent the performance errors in the short term, and then improve health over the long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did you get to the point where you had to how much trial and error or to place to kind of get to a point where it is what it is, and
Yeah.
release?
That's a great question, because, of course, everybody, the population, everybody says, policing is stressful and so forth. But in academia, you have to prove everything, right? So you can't just believe, people say that. So I actually had to hook up officers to heart monitors and take, stress hormone samples, spit samples, when they were in training and in the field. And it was really neat. We were even embedded with some of the federal level tactical teams. And, I got to witness a lot of different training in the field, and then we could kind of prove that people, their heart rates were up close to 200 sometimes, and they were dealing with very intense things. And when you're having a stress response that high, it can affect your senses. You can get tunnel vision, your hearing can be affected, your motor skills can be impacted, and people aren't as able to remember the great training that they did have about their tactics or techniques. Yes. And so we found that we could see that really quickly. As soon as I hooked up officers, it was interesting because at first when I started working, the officers, they're very straight-faced.
Yeah.
So I had them hooked up and they're doing their things, and I thought, what am I doing this for? I'm not going to find anything, because they just looked like nothing was going on. And then I looked down at the heart monitors, and then I looked at their actual results. I was like, wow, inside, there's a lot going on. Wow. Right? And so then when I could show the officers, hey, this was what's going on, and this was right at the time of the scenario that, that a mistake was made, or, that this kind of, this was missed or so forth, or a really good thing happened. And they could connect what was going on inside with what they were doing in the scenario.
Okay.
It was really eye-opening.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you find a lot of the the research or now what iPREP is right now?
Yeah.
How long has it been released to the public for? I know you said in 2011 you came, you returned to Canada.
Yeah, I came back from the U.S. To Canada in 2011 and did the initial kind of planning, what was needed out there. And then our first studies with Finland, where they gave us access to all their different levels of policing, was in 2013, starting 2013.
Okay.
And our last study, well, we're currently running a study. I can get to that later, but our last study on iPREP specifically ended in 2018. Okay. So we've done all kinds of different studies, randomized control trials where we just put people in categories. We've looked at people over the course of 18 months. We've looked at people, in different experts versus novices, so that we could really be confident that this worked.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It almost, the reason why I ask is, how I'm interpreting this program, which we're going to dive a little bit into at the program, is almost like, could this program, be successful or do well if it was released in the 70s? And the reason why I ask is because most people, I've heard many times people say, I'll talk to a therapist. And there's almost a stigmatism of, oh, you talk to a therapist? Where,
right.
No, but to me, like when you're telling me about how sometimes a law enforcement individual come inside, it's like they almost have like an ego that's just not for me. Like, I'm this, I'm that. It's like the times right now are also like very demanding and asking for resources like this. Mental health back in the 70s and 80s was almost taboo to talk about, right? To say, you were ashamed to say anything right now.
Yeah.
Where now it's becoming, no, these are things that people go through, right? And something like this could really benefit.
Well, for sure. And stress is not particularly a mental health condition, right? So we need stress. It's not like our goal is to reduce all stress. In fact, like when you're going into a scenario where somebody's house and you don't know what's going on, you want some activation. You want to be have that level. It's just modifying it, right? So what I realized early on in working with police officers is that I didn't need to focus on the mental health terms.
Yes.
I focused more on the biology of it, the sports, the physical control, it's different than physical fitness, right? Because it's that's important as well, but this is modulating your human stress response. But focusing the words on that, it's great for mental health. It has that extra benefit, but you don't need to talk about it as therapy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
And then I would mention that it's the buy-in piece, right? Police really require, law enforcement, frontline people want the buy-in. Show me why this is good for me to do this. And when the way in which we run that program is they get immediate feedback right away. So we can do it through apps, we can do it through monitoring their responses. So they might come in with a little bit of a closed mind up front, but as soon as they get that, we find as soon as they see that first heart rate response and they tie that back to the scenario they just did, it's like a light bulb goes off. They're like, wow, that's actually real. That's actually happening. And it gets their attention right away.
Okay.
Because, other than something like iPREP, how do you look inward? How do you know how the inward piece is working?
That's
you don't.
right.
So this program really shows them what's going on the inside. So there might be a little bit of that kind of like, this is all new to me. What's going on with this? But as soon as they get that first feedback, boom, they're in, and then that they're fully invested in this.
Okay.
Once that happens.
Well, what I love about this, because you're like a real life testimony, Steve, because you also, we're talking a lot about law enforcement and policing and what inspired the whole thing. You used to be a police officer with Peel. So to me, and that's kind of almost where your connection kind of came into play as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And actually, it's interesting because the first time I met Steve and when we gave our initial presentation, you were one of the doubters. Like you came up and said.
I was like, because I've been training for so long. I've been doing police training. I was a doubter. I'm like, just one more thing to add to the mix.
So when you see, what was it that, if you can go back then, what was the doubt for you at that time?
I think it was, you get caught up in this idea that I've been doing this so long, I feel like I was pretty good at it, that I know what I'm doing. So why do I have to have something else coming in to tell me to do this, do this, do this? So it's a little bit of that closed mindset. But something really rang true with me, which is like, how do we look at the inside? How do we actually pay attention to what's inward versus outward? Because I could teach you handcuffing all day, I could teach you firearms all day, but if I haven't addressed the internal part, there's going to be problems, there's going to be issues, and it's actually going to make my job a lot harder as a trainer, right? And at the end of the day, what we all want is a good performance in a real life application and long-term health of the person as they go through such a stressful job for 25, 30 years. So I'm like, you know what, I should pay attention to this. And I also realized that there people coming in like Dr. Anderson, they've been at this as long as I've been at policing.
Wow.
They're just doing it someone different. So their time in on the research and all that stuff is equal to my time in and doing this. So clearly they have expertise in what they're saying and doing. So what a great idea to bring those two concepts together and start working together on a really good product that's going to benefit frontline people. Okay,
so as I'm the audience right now, as I'm listening to this, what is, like for myself, a reference point to be like, this is something I can bring back to my organization? Like what are some indicators that for myself I can be like, this could be really applied well here on that? And what would be some things to look at?
Well, so any situation, a lot of organizations, even if you're at a high stress corporate job or so forth, if you have those situations where, meetings get escalated or you feel your physiology, I'm sure people can think back and say, hey, when was the situation where, your heart's just beating like boom, boom, boom? Does it work to say to yourself, hey, heart, just calm down, stop beating as fast? No, I've never had anyone say, yeah, I can just say that to myself and all of a sudden my physiology is perfect, right?
Right.
So part of our training incorporates ways to kind of override the system, kind of hack the system, and get you in that state.
Okay.
So no matter what your mind is kind of spiraling out to, you can actually train your body. We're really good at conditioning our body, just like, with lifting weights, you condition your muscles to, muscle memory. You can actually train your nervous system like that, behaviorally condition it, so that when you face stress, your body moves into this adaptive zone, right? And we can get into that later.
No, for sure. I mean, look, you hear all the time, they say stress is a killer, right? You always hear that. And look, for myself, running an operations, I run several of them, it's how you said hacking your mind to not get stuck there. Because, at the end of the day, it could be detrimental to your health.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how the iPREP session works. How long is this program?
Yeah, so we have like a user course that if you were going to train all your employees or so forth, it'd be about 2 days.
Okay.
And we highly encourage people to, we tailor it to their program. So if you have training scenarios or you have any kind of training that's active, we come in and integrate iPREP into what you're already doing so that it makes sense to you and your employees. We've done this with organizations like police managers who had to deal with irate meetings or angry employees, and that worked just as well as, a tactical team. So breaking down the doors and doing that kind of thing. So we also have a Train the Trainers program where it's 3 days, and it's more intensive because those individuals are learning how to, not only the iPREP techniques, but how to train them.
Okay.
And then about an update about every 2 years to keep the program really evidence-based.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think, from what I'm hearing so far, this is something that should be almost like an essential piece of training.
And it should be first.
Yeah.
So, if you think about logically, if you just think logically for a minute, you're a human being, and you come to the table with your stress responses, your physiology, all that comes to the table. So before I teach you anything, wouldn't I spend a few minutes, some time working on how you start to manage and control some of those stress responses? Because otherwise we're working on an assumption. We're assuming that you can do it. And I think that's the mistake that's been made in the past, is there's this big assumption there that says, well, you can do it. You just figure it out on your own. Well, that's not true. We could actually teach you stuff. You can learn things to move that process along really quickly and also get better results in real life applications. And now that you can manage those stress responses, now I start giving the information of the job, whatever that might be, the external training, the different things. Because when you're in a training mode, you're under scrutiny all the time. Everyone's looking at you. Your peers are looking at you. Your boss, your future bosses are looking at you. The trainers are looking at you. You have to pass exams. There's a whole lot of inherent stressors just in the training process itself. So now that I look back at some of my old training I used to do in the past, I would say, I'd be looking at someone like they didn't get it. They didn't figure it out. They didn't understand the information that I provided them, or they can't replicate the technique. But now, looking back after the fact, I would say to myself, well, maybe it has nothing to do with their understanding of the technique. Maybe it's totally tied to their physiology that's affecting the performance piece.
Interesting.
You see the difference?
Yes.
I can spend more time trying to fix the technique over and over and over again. But if the physiology hasn't been corrected, it's an endless loop that's not going to fix itself.
So the training will definitely help in dealing with the situation. Will it also help in the outcome of a situation? Meaning as in because your outcome or your reaction can set something off in a complete different course.
Of course.
So what we've seen is that when you come into a room and somebody's escalated, you're dealing with an escalated person, it's a natural human response to trigger your own physiology, even if you're not realizing it. But we'll see, when we look at the heart monitors, we'll see jumps in their physiology. Interestingly, that's just a natural human response. So if the officer can keep that in an optimal zone, they keep their physiology in that optimal zone where they work really well, it often brings the other person down. Their physiology comes to the calm.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and even if they don't come down, the person that's controlling their physiology can remember all their training, and they can handle that situation according to their training.
The more I'm hearing this, the more I want to do this. Because I'll tell you this, the way I'm looking at this, it's not just like for one specific set of industry. I mean, it seems like you can bring this into like relationships. You can bring this into anything. You know what I mean?
You're a human being. You bring with you all those things.
That's right.
It applies everywhere, because anywhere you are, it applies.
Absolutely.
I had a lot of officers coming to me and saying, like, now I can talk to my teenagers, or you know, my wife and I aren't arguing as much, or so forth. And
no, absolutely. And that's the other side of it. When you're bringing that much stress on your job, it's very easy for that to cross over. Are there like tactics or strategies in the training that also helps you kind of box almost like, okay, this is going to happen here, but when I come into this new environment right now, I'm not going to carry some of that baggage into there? Like, is there like, you know?
That's what we try to. So we teach a technique called reset, refocus, respond. Okay. So this is for the acute stress. You know, you're going to enter a situation and there's potentially an escalated person, or you get home and there's a potentially escalated teenager, something like that. So you know you want to keep your physiology in this optimal zone for you. And everybody's a bit different. It's not like there's a perfect heart rate. Like you have your optimal zone, and we can figure that out very, very quickly on a monitor. You can see where you perform optimally. So the reset is a way to breathe very quickly. Okay. And it's a quick in-breath, pursed lips out breath. It's a stance, a grounded, stance. And you can see it on the monitor, how you are actually controlling your heart rate, and you're staying in that zone.
Interesting. And
your voice doesn't go up, and you don't get tense. Your muscles don't tense up. You can physically see a person is in more control just by doing those simple techniques. Now, there's a lot of other techniques out there. I don't know if you've heard of combat breathing and all these other different kinds of breathing. And those can be great in themselves. But you've got to think about what technique you're doing to what situation you're at. Okay? And that's what iPREP is about, tailoring the technique to the situation. So combat breathing was like you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. So can you imagine how that would maybe interfere if you're trying to have a conversation with your partner,
and
you're counting.
Stop hitting me, I have to count.
Or holding your breath. Holding your breath is not good. So if you're holding breath for 4 counts, you're more likely to hyperventilate when you stop holding your breath, right? Which increases your physiology, not decreases it. So it's
one thing that came to my attention was that I'll give you an example. So I would be getting ready to bring up new recruits to the range, okay, so that they could shoot their qualifier. And these were people that had failed, and they had to redo it. So I'd be kind of prepping them downstairs, and they had to go upstairs to our range area. And I realized, especially after I started to understand iPREP and some of the principles, that many of them had already failed in the classroom downstairs. Because their physiology was so high that they were already cranked because they knew they had to go shoot their qualifier. They're under the gun. They've already failed it once. And I was like, man, I shouldn't even send that person up there, because they are going to fail again, and it's only going to defeat their confidence more. It's going to have another black mark against their name in terms of they failed twice now. And I could see it. I'd be like, they're going to fail. They're going to fail. And the thing was, until I learned iPREP, I didn't have any solutions for them. So I would just say, hey, take it easy, relax, you're going to be fine, go up there, take it slow, they'll walk you through it. But that's not enough, because I didn't have anything to give them and say, let's do this to get this physiology under control before you go upstairs. But they're walking upstairs to fail. And until I had this piece, I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't have anything to give them to make that better and make them more likely to pass on the way up.
Okay. Interesting.
So just to finish the reset, refocus, respond. So that's a great example. You could have given them that. You change your physiology. You modulate your actual heart rate and stress response, even if they're starting to think, I'm going to fail. But when you reset your physiology, and then the refocus is, okay, what do I need to do? I just need to shoot that target. I've shot it 100,000 times. I know how to do that. So you reset your physiology, then you can focus in on exactly what you need to do, and then you do it. And when people practice that over the course of a few scenarios, 7, 8 scenarios, their body, it feels good to get that right.
Oh my
You would be
goodness, yeah.
amazed. Like our bodies are attracted to that. So you feel like, wow. And then you can see it on the monitor and you perform better. So that makes a really positive loop in your brain.
You know, when you're saying about how your body feels it and almost like absorbs it, the best way I can describe that, what you just said right now, to connect that feeling is like when you're trying to assemble something from IKEA, for example, and you're going through 1,000 bits, but when you finally get it, your body goes this, I completed, like you feel like you just connected. You kind of go through that same thing through that training piece.
Yeah.
Can you reference any stories or I was gonna say experiments, but any research from people that came in a certain way, and then when they did your training, they were put to the test again and they had a very different reaction that kind of gave them that, is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, anecdotally, I've had tactical team officers come back to me and say, there was 2 guys, they took our training. They were actually, this was in Finland, and they were actually, there was a call to a guy with a knife with people in the apartment. They were going to the door and they were just rushing to the door. And then all of a sudden the guy said, iPREP. And they stopped, took that breath before they reached the handle, and they opened it and they focused, and they were able to not shoot him.
Wow.
And they said this was almost a for sure shot, but we remembered exactly what we could do. And I don't know exactly what they did. Whatever they did tactically was enough to get the knife away or whatever, and they didn't have to shoot him. But the fact that they instituted that technique said he really believes it saved that person's life.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's always interesting to see that kind of thing. And when you say, by the way, when you say the word iPREP, is that like the key word to kind of almost bring you into like a reset mode?
Well, people can say whatever they want, but we have different terms. Like in the very acute stress moment, we can just say, do your 1 breath, or, reset, refocus, respond, or so forth. But because, again, it's individualized, like we've had people from the military do this, and they have their own kind of routine when they get ready to go in the field. And this person has told me what they say, to remind them to do the iPREP techniques.
Okay.
So it's not really about the secret word. It's like the body motion, like whatever it is that reminds you. Like we'll give you ideas.
One thing that's neat with iPREP is that it's not necessarily replacing what you're doing. It's adding another piece to what you're already
complementing.
doing. So we're not going in and telling TAC teams to do this differently.
No.
Or we want you to do this instead of this. We're not saying that at all. Say do what you do, but what we're going to do is offer you a program or techniques that are going to get the most out of the training that you're currently doing. Because it's not on us to say what the techniques should be, but if you're going to do those, that's factor in the physiology, so you get the best response out of those. Okay,
so if I do these 2 this 2 days, for example, this course, right?
Yeah.
Is there something that I have to like once I have that skill set, I have to practice to make sure that it becomes my routine and becomes into a habit?
Yes.
That's a great question. We did a study on it, actually.
Okay.
And so we followed people over 18 months. And what we found is that about a year, the skills start to need a boost, right? And so that makes sense with any training.
Of course.
Even with something like weightlifting.
Yeah.
You can't just learn it once.
That's
and then,
right.
This is a body response. So just like you'd work out your body, you would practice these techniques.
Okay.
And like I said, once you condition your body to do that in your occupation, then practice it at home or practice it, in traffic. Yes.
No, absolutely. This is I'm telling you, this stuff is, the more and more I hear about it, the more I want to jump in. If I'm an individual and I want to do this, do I have to be part of an organization, or is this open to individuals?
So we're currently in the next few months holding some train the trainers. So usually those folks are from organizations, but we are thinking of how to integrate this, for kind of an open call, if we have a place to do that, and we could do that that training.
Okay,
so,
that's good. And the reason why I ask is I know as of late, Premier Ford is injecting a lot of resources to law enforcement, and again, if this is something that could be so detrimental to help someone succeed on the job, again, this should be something that should be ingrained in training, right? What do you think are some of the challenges that right now, decision makers are put it through, does it really come down to dollars? Is that really what it comes down to?
A lot of times it really does. And we have tried in every way possible. Like we turned iPREP into a course at the University of Toronto Continuing Ed through the med school to try to keep just the costs of, paying our trainers to go out and do it. So we're trying to keep the costs as reasonable as possible, but also with an accredited training. Like University of Toronto, American Medical Association, and so forth. This accreditation matters because then you're getting a standardized program.
Okay.
And, but yeah, a lot of times it comes down to cost, but we want to remind services and agencies and organizations, we're coming in to integrate this into what you're already doing. Okay? And so for very low cost, like a heart monitor, they can be shared, like a polar heart monitor and a little inexpensive app you can download from the iStore, Apple Store. You can, completely change the way your employees are functioning.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, just for those listening, and just to make sure I'm on the same page, you do not have to be in law enforcement or the protective industry. You can be in IT and apply to this. You can be in any industry. You can be a teacher dealing with students that are going to drive you up the wall. This is what I mean.
Yeah, I teach it to my undergrads, and I have students come back and say, like, I had to give a talk at at my church, or I had to give a speech in class, and thank you for teaching me that, because like it really made the difference.
Especially with young people, like in their development, like. I just find this, like, when you said that outside, I was thinking to myself, wow, like my daughter, she actually is going to UFT this year to get into the law programs.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that when she was first looking at getting into, like, picking her school, she wanted to almost, like, it was her first choice, but she thought, she heard all this stigma about how difficult it can be and how it can lead to this and that. And I thought, look, it's just your mind that you got to tap into to look at it in a different way, right? So I'm going to probably recommend it to your course.
Send me an email, yeah.
Look, that's amazing.
Congrats
on that, again, this is something that I feel should very much so be in curriculum. We talked about something outside that excites me, and I know it excites you guys as well, and that is scenario-based training, tying all this into place. Now, for us as an organization, anytime somebody comes on board, they go through 2 days of training. One is just the general openness of de-escalation, and then the second day, all that training that we put into place now, we want to see them now in scenarios. So we do bring in actors. Sometimes when we can't do it all the time, we have some of our staff kind of act in the role. And they're pretty good actors.
Absolutely.
Anyways, but what we want to do now is see how they react. Yeah. Now, for myself, what blows my mind, and I'm pretty sure we can tap into your experiences, that you think because it's a scenario that, and again, you're acting, that someone is going to...
You get real life responses.
Perfect. You're getting something real. So I've seen firsthand how people really act. And we've actually, based on some of those scenarios, especially when they're in a training phase just starting to come into we've actually had to say, look, unfortunately, the way this responded, we can't bring you on right now. You're going to need some areas.
I'll go one further for you.
Yeah.
If you were to look at their heart rates, it's not even during the scenario. It was before the scenario started. It's when you said, hey, you're on deck, you're next.
Okay.
That's when it started. Or they're driving in that morning knowing that they're doing a scenario-based day that's going to be evaluated. Their physiology is already being affected. So it's not actually correct to say that the scenario responses are 100% tied to the scenario. It's all the anticipation of the scenario. It's all that piece, which is a real life problem, because when you're going to a call, when you're responding to something, you have all that as well. You have that anticipation of what you're getting to, where you're going to run into. So the physiology piece starts usually way sooner than the actual scenario begins. Now, there'll be heightened pieces of physiology within the scenario, but there's been responses. And I'll go one step further than that. When you debrief them afterward on how they did, you're going to see some of the highest heart rates and some of the highest physiology you've seen all day.
Really?
Because that's where they're being assessed, where you're either agreeing with their performance or disagreeing with it. And sometimes the assessment piece creates higher physiology than the actual scenario itself.
Wow.
And we could see that. That was one of the things that shocked me so much. And this is why it's important to do research at first, hook people up and just observe what's going on, because we could see that response. And you know what? It made us realize the scenarios don't have to be super complicated.
No,
and,
simple.
Ninjas coming from the ceiling and all of these things. In fact, that's like, you're way missing the point. person's a deer in the headlights. Like they're not learning anything. So a component of iPREP is starting with really simple scenarios. Like people at first say, there's no way. Then you hook people up and you get them just to do this initial interaction, and you can see their physiology. Then you teach them how to modulate that. Then you move up to a more difficult scenario. It's a graduated learning.
And you guys do the scenarios in training?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have machines that are hooked up.
Right.
They're wearing them. They're just wearing them.
And you can see that
keep your
you
phone
can
in
just
your
see-
pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we do is the officer is obviously not looking at their phone while they're doing the scenario,
yeah.
but we have somebody holding it, and then they're just wearing a heart monitor, and they do what they naturally do. And then you can review the video with them after.
Is there benchmarks of where your heart should be? Like, meaning as in, like, for example, if you're talking to someone about someone just lost a child, or you're going in the fight's about to break out, your heart rate should be sitting at like 155 or something. What should it be?
Yeah. At first, when we were doing this, people wanted to know, like, what's the exact optimal range? And like
Okay.
I said, it is kind of different for everybody. But generally, like when you're sitting around 65 to 80, 85, that's our normal resting
Right.
heart rate. When you start getting up around 100, that's like when you're engaged or activated. And then, but we would see people like standing at the door. They hadn't even gone into the room yet at 160, 170.
Oh, wow.
So then you can see, think about it, when you're on the treadmill and you
Yeah.
hit 200, you're pretty maxed out, right?
Right.
So you don't have much room to go. If you're at 170 when you're at the door, you're going to become very disorganized and kind of tunnel vision, all that stuff, as soon as you go in, if you're that escalated then. So we saw that really you have simple scenarios, you help people kind of keep in their zone, and I've seen people perform really well, at 140, 150, usually, like I said, 160, 170, 180, especially if it's longer. If it just hits that point and comes down, that's fine. You might have just needed that boost, but you see that for 5 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever. That's going to be.
I mean, if you're
at
involved in
risk.
like a shootout, for example, I can only imagine your heartbeat's close to 200.
Yes.
And I'm assuming with training that you could actually, as you get, be control of your domain, so you can make a better decision.
Yeah, and it's important to know that heart rate's just an indicator of what's happening in the brain.
Right.
Okay? And it's an indicator of what's happening in the brain and body. The stress response is in your brain. Okay? So, and what we can do is the way that we breathe, we can send signals to our brain to calm down, or to stay in that modulated state. But what was the neat thing about the iPREP research studies is that, we gave people like their pretest, which is their normal scenario duties, and then taught them iPREP, and then we gave them a really difficult, like an active shooter scenario, which is really maxed out. And people's physiology was higher, but they didn't make mistakes. So that's when we know that even though when you're in a real intense situation, you're going to have that physiological reactivity, but you're going to perform more optimally at that range.
Interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you a scenario. So about 2 weeks ago, we were asked to go speak at the Evergreen Brickworks on risk management for their events people.
Okay.
And here's the thing: as much as I do podcasts and I enjoy, I actually, when I have to go speak in front of a group, I hate it, and I hate it because what it comes with it, right? It's the build-up. It's the build-up, right?
Yes.
So, are you able to share a tip on something that you could do for something like that? Again, you don't want to give too much out because you gotta do the course, everybody. But is there something you can share that to kind of bring you down?
I'll tell you, the reset, refocus, respond.
Okay.
So when you're standing there, because you're anticipate, or when you're in the car driving there, whatever. So you want to kind of get in that grounded position, either seated or standing. You kind of, feet on the floor. You're kind of in that solid. Don't hunch over because that hunches over your lungs. That's compressing your lungs, and you're not sitting slouched because that's changing your lungs as well.
Okay.
So you kind of upright body, let the air out. You breathe in really kind of deeply, hold for a second or two at the top of the breath, and then really slow pursed lips breathing.
Okay.
I'm not going to do it into the microphone, but really slow. You're controlling that. And if you were hooked up to a monitor, you'd see your heart rate going.
You can actually watch it in real time.
You can watch
Wow.
it.
You can watch your heart
So
rate
you
come down.
imagine,
Okay.
as you're breathing out with those pursed lips, you're pushing your heart rate down. You tighten your core and let that go, all the way through your body and out to the ground, you're actually modifying your brain's response.
Interesting.
Okay? Whether you believe it or not, if you were on the monitor, you could see it.
Wow.
So then, in the next few seconds, that gives you a window to now focus on what's important, your first few lines of your speech. So that's what I do usually. Because once you start talking, you're natural. You're going to be fine. Right? So you reset, you refocus on what's the first lines of my speech, and then you respond, you do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'm gonna
Try that
apply
out.
that. No, listen, that's amazing. And to me, I'm thinking again, just this tactic that I shared, this example, this strategy that you use can be used for anything. I mean, I'm thinking to myself right now, anytime I'm about to do something, if I use that little strategy, even if it meant just lowering a little bit,
exactly,
you're in a better position than you were before.
Yep. You feel more in control. Your brain is more in control.
I use it all the time when I'm dealing with a more difficult client.
Yeah.
Someone that's, has more needs. I'll do the iPREP related breathing techniques and stuff just to get myself set, because I know that as soon as they pick up, there's going to be some sort of pushback.
Right.
There's going to be some verbal pushback. So I'm anticipating that. So I'm doing exactly what Judith just mentioned. So I'm resetting myself so that I'm ready to go.
Okay.
I'm ready to go. So I'm still going to have a response to it, but at least I'm starting at a better spot, and I'm mindful of it. So as it starts to go up, I can start bringing it back down again.
Okay.
I think that's one of the neat things about iPREP is just being aware of your physiology, just factoring it into the equation, because we weren't really doing that before. It's just factor it in, and just by being aware of it, you're already in a better spot to start dealing with it as it comes up. And then when you add evidence-based techniques right on top of that, now you're onto something in terms of performance.
This is amazing. Let me ask you guys this. Every year, I mean, as the world ages and as the population, civilization adapts, things are changing, right? And we have to evolve. Do you find that this training also evolves? Does it need to evolve? Or could it be fundamentally utilized 20 years down the road? Meaning, as in, the other outside elements can come in. Will you have to, regroup and say, okay, well, this is happening now. We're going to evolve the training. Are you paying attention to that?
We do,
Okay.
and that's one part of keeping it systematically delivered, because we're always now the actual biological mechanisms by which it works aren't going to change, right? Because stress begins in your brain.
That's right.
You send signals down to your heart. Your heart starts beating, adrenaline, and so forth. So that's not going to change. But the way that we deliver it, the kinds of scenarios that we do, the way that people learn. I mean, students learning in my classes, and you'll see, it's totally different. Like with your daughter going to school, versus when I started teaching more than a decade ago. Kids are learning in different ways.
Right.
They're absorbing information in different ways. So being able to evolve and adjust from that. And a whole other part of iPREP, which we don't have to get into now, but it's the dealing with the chronic stress. So what I gave you was the in the moment techniques, but we have what's really important too is to keep your physiology regulated over time, because those small things that pick away at you, the small things result in burnout and occupational stress injuries or whatever over time.
So when people, for example, have mental breakdowns, for example, and you use those reference points.
Yeah.
That's basically attributed to chronic stress, dealing with something over and over. I mean, we had a person on the show that was talking, a nutritionist, that was saying, from a nutrition perspective, I was telling him my first thing that I do in the morning is I'll have a cup of coffee. Well, if you're stressed the night before and then you have some coffee first thing in the morning, it's going to throw your hormones off and almost just really escalate your stress levels.
Yeah. So that's a really great point, and I like to talk to people about that. We as humans only have so many internal resources and chemicals, and they do get used up or they do get burned out, right? Or it's just like any other kind of if you overtrain a certain muscle in weightlifting, it's going to be burned out. You're not going to be able to use it the same way. And so people don't think of that because we don't always know what our hormone levels are, or cholesterol, or whatever. We don't know those internal measures until we get it measured. But that's burnout. And then once you get that fatigued, then your body shuts down. So if somebody gets to the point where they have a complete break or, a nervous breakdown or so forth, they're going to take a lot longer to be able to recover their reserves.
Okay.
So reserves are this measurable chemical and biological substances that we can measure, and we know if a person is getting to that. But the beauty of iPREP is that when you see your biology way before you get to that point, you can start to see, like, this is really triggering me, or this is where the stress is really, this is what I need to work on, and so forth. Like when I get even organizational stress, you're at your desk and that person calls.
Yes.
And you're like, man, and it can just change your whole day.
Right.
Or whatever. So that is affecting the chemicals and the processes in your body.
You must be like almost like a robot in the sense of where I say that you're so mastered, you're so tapped in. It's like nothing phases you. It's like you're Yoda, like you said. Nothing.
Well, that's why I study what I do. But no, it's funny because I've got my stuff that triggers me. And one officer that I was measuring, I had never seen anybody so calm in the field. And I said, when they got back, I said, "Did you have your monitor on?" And they said to me, like, "Yeah, like this is how I am at work now." Get me when I'm talking to my mother-in-law and you'll see a difference.
Wow, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so different things trigger us.
Interesting.
That's interesting too. Like from a training perspective is that we tend to focus on the physical stuff, the person in the room, the weapon I see over there, the anticipated fight that might happen. But a lot of it's internal is creating the stuff. So it's the stuff that you're bringing to the table is creating those stress responses. So it's not just the external stuff that's in my environment and stuff. I'm bringing stuff to the table that, if not checked, can bring the whole thing up.
Yes.
As well. Because to bring a whole situation down, I too have to come down, not just the subject or the person that I'm dealing with. I have to come down as well.
Because they're going to mirror off you.
Because they're going to mirror off me, or I'm going to push them further up if I don't do that, which is all the de-escalation pieces and stuff. So I have to remind ourselves that we bring stuff to the table just by showing up. And we want to make sure that that's the best, the best we can be in that moment. So that we get the highest level of performance out of what we're trying to accomplish at that particular situation.
I love that. Okay, so I'm an organization right now listening to this, and I'm like, you know what? I want to bring my people in. I want them to experience this. What is the process? What is the next steps? How do I find you? How do I go down this road to get this?
Yeah, great. I will give my email.
Okay.
And you would just contact me. I put you in contact with our University of Toronto, scheduling, and we would get a time that would work out for everybody. And then we would ask what is the unique aspects of your training. What do you want to accomplish training-wise? We don't give any tips, like Steve was saying. We don't tell anybody about their tactics or their rules or anything like that. It's purely the physio integrated with whatever your standards and policies are.
Okay.
So, like when we worked with U.S. probation, they have different policies than the police. They
different
back
rules.
out. I mean, they don't keep going in, right? If
they have very different rules.
Yeah.
So it's a neat thing because we go into like say U.S. probation or some of these other services that have very unique rules, and when we go in, I'm not there to evaluate if they did well in the scenario. I'm not there to evaluate whether that they did this or they did that. What were you trying to accomplish? And then we'll look at, did the physiology add to that or subtract from that? So we're not talking about tactics. We're not talking about, the rules of engagement, none of that kind of stuff. But it's about, you had a mission. You had something that you were trying to accomplish. Maybe it was to exit the room. Your mission was to exit. Did you do that well? And, what was the physiology impact on you being able to accomplish that particular goal? So it's a different way of doing scenarios because it's not a judgment of right or wrong. It's more of, did you meet the goals that you set for yourselves within the scenario? How are those met? And because it's like that, we can take it and drop it into any organization because I don't have to be an expert in their policies. I don't have to be an expert in how they follow the law based on what they do. I just have to know what were you trying to accomplish and were you able to accomplish that.
Okay.
So it could easily be applied onto pretty much anybody in any service because they're still doing what they do. We're just looking at it from a perspective of performance and were they able to achieve the goals they set for themselves.
Okay. Interesting.
I have a really important distinction too because sometimes organizations try to combine assessment with training. Okay, so what I mean is, they have one day a year or something where they're trying to train a new skill and assess the person whether they should either, carry their firearm or, have these responsibilities on the job. But when people are trying to learn something and they're being evaluated as well, they're stressed about being evaluated. They're not going to be soaking up the information as well. So we always say, if you're coming in, you're going to have us come in and teach iPREP, have it be a fully training time. So your employees know, or your people, this is an opportunity for you to just learn. We're not assessing how good you are as an employee. And then they have the freedom to actually soak it up and learn it.
Okay. Very interesting. I'm really glad that I heard this today. Honestly, whenever something is done that can impact and change and maneuver, and obviously we're very big advocates into training, very, very big. Our industry, and I'm referring to the security industry, we actually, we had a podcast that came out today because we were referencing about the situation that happened last weekend or 2 weekends ago at Yonge and Dundas where that woman was being stopped. When stuff like that happens, to me, a lot of times it comes back down to the simplicities of training, right? And that's something that I feel anybody that's in the protectors industry, and I'm just only focusing on our industry, they need that training. They need to be able to, you're dealing with people. You're dealing with, and anything you do will change the course of the situation and how you react, how you respond. As you said, usually we're thinking about trying to de-escalate the individual. Sometimes we got to de-escalate ourselves.
Of course.
You know what I mean? First. So this is where I find this is so useful and practical.
Yeah.
Of course. If I related it back to, say, firearms training, and you're missing the target, it's not the gun's fault.
Yeah, exactly.
The gun didn't suddenly become something else, and that's why you're missing.
That's right.
It's a user application of that firearm that's causing the problem. The gun is the gun. It stays the same all the time. It's the user. That's why one person can pick it up and hit bullseyes every time, and the other person will pick it up and miss all their targets. There's the user side.
Okay.
And that's what we have to remember. And this is another piece of the puzzle for dealing with that user side. And it's probably the most important part of that puzzle. Because until I get that right, how could I teach you something new?
No, this is fantastic.
How could I?
Yeah. I'd actually love to capture a snippet almost of what you guys do to kind of promote it for you guys. Because when you're I say we're in love with training. And
Yes.
we do regularly. When you do that, it's just something when you see how it changes and it transforms. That's the key. That's the testimony right there. And I'm pretty sure you guys get so much fulfillment in seeing people come in one way and leave another.
Yeah, I always actually welcome the doubters. I say, yeah, that's a great question. If you believe it doesn't work, that's great. Come on and see. Just give me a day. Give me half a day.
Okay.
Seriously. Let me hook you up to this monitor. And if you're still unconvinced at the end of the day, that's fine. There's no, I'm not worried about people.
You've trained a lot of
it.
people and a lot of hard people, coming out of hard, policing style organizations that really are hardcore. And I can't remember anyone really, for all the people that we trained, that didn't get something out of it and go, you know what, you kind of won me over on that. Then there will be some that come in the beginning, but they all leave with something.
Amazing.
Because you can't lie with the monitor says what it is.
That's right.
Yeah,
It's right there.
That's it.
That's not me telling you. It's right there.
That's
you look
it.
for yourself.
Well, and then you don't also have to get into arguments with anybody because,
just go like this.
That's right.
you just show them. And so it takes that part out. But I will say also that it helps you kind of indicate who's not engaged with training. So if you don't see any stress responses, and they're kind of sitting back, whatever.
They're zoned
You can
out.
see they're either zoned out, they're not interested in the job, they're not engaged, and they're not in the best place to learn anything either. So we do need some stress arousal to learn. That's actually shown in research, right? So you want that kind of ideal range. So it helps you kind of on all levels as a boss, employee, a
I
trainer.
love it.
Kind of.
I love it. Imagine being a teacher of a kindergarten class, and then you have these hooked up to see whose kids are zoned in or not.
Right.
I do the breathing. When my daughter was 4, I did the breathing with her, just big whale breaths. I just called it something different. And people have told me that too. They use it with their kids.
Right.
Because like I said, it's a human response. It's just
Amazing.
the way you teach it.
If I want to get more information on iPREP, is there a website I can visit?
Yeah, so it's proresilience.org.
Okay.
So yeah, all one word, proresilience.org.
Okay.
And if you want to see my faculty website with all the research articles, that's HeartLab, HARTLAB.
Okay.
.net.
.net. Perfect. And we're going to also
And our
put those
contact
links.
info is there too. So if somebody wanted to, get a hold of us, they could either look on the websites or email me.
Okay, amazing. Steve, do you want to do a shout out to your website?
I'm at steptraininginc.com, and we incorporate all the iPREP products and the iPREP piece into, basically we specialize in municipal training.
Right.
So dealing with, and we've actually started to include some of these user courses for iPREP within municipalities with great success. It's really starting to, they're seeing the value in doing that coming forward.
Listen, to me, this has been an absolute breath of fresh air. It's always to kind of hear a different perspective. And as you said, this is the internal mechanisms, which I think needs a lot of attention. I just, for myself, I think you've recruited a disciple. I can tell you that right now. So
can't wait to see more of you.
Yeah, 100%. So we will definitely be sharing this. I want to thank you both for your time. And I also think, I think it'd be really good to kind of, again, capture a glimpse as well of the piece, because I think a lot of times when we're listening to something, it's like, okay, it sounds great, but there's so much here that is so interesting. It would only do it justice.
Like
Absolutely.
a video clip
Yeah,
or something?
or something,
Yeah,
yeah.
we have lots of clips. So we're working on putting something together more visually. And I will just, if I can, give a shout out to, we've transferred now iPREP to focus on mental health for officers with operational stress injury. We're just doing a research study on it.
Okay.
And it's called Autonomic Modulation Training. And I'll give you the link for that too. So if people were interested in taking a research study, it's online, confidential, because we want to see if we can transfer some of these techniques in person in scenario-based training to an online format. It's always trickier to do stuff online, but there's a lot of officers that are public safety personnel that are, struggling with mental health symptoms. Not, it's not therapy, but to see if that can translate to the online.
Okay,
platform.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Do you get, with all this stuff happening, I'm pretty sure you guys have some time to yourselves to enjoy life, and it can get very time consuming.
It's very time
when
consuming.
you're pushing, because it's not like this is like deep stuff.
But it's so exciting. It's very rewarding, like you said. Like
Right.
when you see it click.
Yes.
For me, like I like being out in the field much better than being behind my desk,
Yes,
even,
yes,
right?
no, for
Because
sure.
you're working with somebody that's totally doubting it, and they're like, no, this is not going to work. And then boom, they get it. And it's like, wow, so very rewarding.
Amazing. I want to thank you guys for coming on the show today, but I also want to thank you for doing what you guys are doing as a service.
Thank
It's
you.
incredibly needed. It's so
Thank you.
needed. And, for myself, definitely, again, want to be helpful in any way that I can. Again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to people hearing this, and anything that we can do as well on your end, please. I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you so much for having us on.
Amazing. Have a great day,
Glad to be
everyone.
here.
Take care.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This podcast is brought to you by Executive Protection Lifestyle Canada. Make sure to drop by next week and don't forget to subscribe.